And our second speaker is Florian. And can welcome Florian with a speech titled "What Next?"
100. Madam Toastmaster, fellow members, and most welcome guest. 100. Tonight's speech is one of my 100th prepared speech in Toastmasters. And it kind of seems like a good moment to think back and reflect, especially as it is also the final speech in my first pass, the strategic relationship pass, and a good opportunity to reflect and ask, what's next? The strategic relationship pass was in many ways all about communicating as a leader, promoting oneself, and I could summarizing as being a good enough communicator so that you're the one that gets invited to parties. And one of my objectives when I joined Toastmasters, which is still displayed on my LinkedIn profile, was to develop world-class public speaking, leadership, and communication skills. How have I done? 100 speeches on and one pass on. Let's take a step back in the past to understand the present and look at the future first. Do you think you are doing, Florian? These are not your studies. Don't get any ideas above your stations. Be modest. Sois modeste. Always be modest. And don't get any ideas above your stations. This is what my dad told me many times when I was a kid. My dad is in many ways a very simple man. He's pretty much worked the same job all his life. He's very good at it, but never really took up opportunities to get into a leadership position at work. Was my dad a very good communicator? Not always. He loved to shout at me, and sometimes he also shout at my mom because you haven't cleaned the house properly. So a bit of a macho character, shall we say. Was my family's kind of invited to parties, invited to dinners by my dad's colleagues and so on? Sometimes, but not very often, shall we say. And it was always the same people. So communicating with others and networking, and it's not really the kind of things we do in my family. As for leadership, don't get any ideas above your station. We are simple people. The tall poppy syndrome, in other words. And if I wanted to speak about what I'd read about space science or some geopolitical stuff, not interested. But in spite of that, I discovered that I quite enjoyed public speaking at school because it was a way to subtly hit back at the bullies in a way for me. And I had leadership aspiration. And I made a decision when I was 18 that I would leave my family and start my life anew by studying in the United Kingdom at the University of Bath. I loved my time at universities. I met some good friends. I enjoyed my courses. I enjoyed the chemical research I was doing, met some nice people, got to speak on stage by being a student trainer. I even did a 2-hour course on public speaking and one on critical thinking. I had a blast. I even got a leadership experience. I became the chairman of Bath University Conservative Society. Back then, I was young and naive. So whenever we had a conversation at the bar when meeting new members, it's like, oh yeah, we should leave the European Union and so on. My views have changed considerably since then. I was young and naive, and even back then, I saw it as a mean to an end and not an end in itself, which is a reflection that many of my friends and colleagues still haven't done, judging by their Facebook post. But did I get invited to parties at university? Did I become a popular guy? Did I become better at communication and leadership? Not quite. And I realized it earlier today when I had a conversation with, I remember from a taxi driver that drove me to a job interview in 2010. The guy was very interested in one aspect of my university life. How many girlfriends have you had at university? Well, Ah, come on, you must have had at least one, at least for a few months for fun. Well, I haven't had any girlfriend at university. Come on, not even one. You're lying to me. But that was the truth. I was single throughout all my university years, and I was a virgin when I started university. I was a virgin that I never kissed a girl when I left. So getting invited to parties and so on, and speaking myself up, selling myself, really, not good at it with ladies, and not good at it after I graduated when I had to go into the real world and find a job. It took me 3 years to get a graduate level job. I didn't really network my way because it's networking. It's slimy, it's dirty, it's unfair. I became very frustrated, but eventually I got a job in EDF Energy. And in my kind of year on the graduate scheme, I could hear my colleagues speaking, oh, I'm going to be meeting such and such. I'm applying for this opportunity. They were planning their career. They were networking. They were communicating with others and taking the lead and saying, I didn't do any of that. So the result was that my relationship with the company ended a little bit earlier than I would have liked. So what next then? I joined Toastmasters kind of at the same time as I started my career. And in Toastmasters, a number of interesting things happened to me. I did a lot of speeches and did leadership roles, including leading our district of 5,000 members and 180 clubs in the middle of the pandemic in the last Toastmaster year that finished on June 30th, 2020. But let's talk about networking and the more softer aspect of communication, shall we say. Well, accidentally, I actually became quite good at it in Toastmasters. Accidentally, because I kind of didn't really do it on purpose in many respects. I just went to a lot of events and met a lot of people, something that all of you can do. It's much easier to do it online nowadays, actually. And I see quite a few international people on the call today. And I kind of started to notice who was whom and who was doing what. And unconsciously, I started building a network, as I realized during one of the projects in the strategic relationship path. A network that came in to be quite handy when I started to get into senior leadership role and I needed people to help me and do training and do things for me. And a network that even became international when I attended international events as part of my role and met people there. And I was started to be the one that got invited to event. Oh, there's that cool event taking place in Bialystok in Poland. Why don't you come, Florian? Oh, yes, I'll come, and I'll go there and see the polar bears in the streets of Białystok. And what about some other things as well, like selling oneself and speaking up? You can learn that at Toastmasters as well. But I kind of did the same way. I didn't really do it consciously. It seemed like the right thing to do when I started to get leadership role. I'm like, I'm the district director. There are 5,000 members under me. As I kept saying to myself, I've got to communicate. So I became a spammer and sent a newsletter every fortnight. Some people said nobody reads it. Well, the opening rate was 55% on average. So I'm sorry, but the newsletter got read. Maybe they just opened it for 1 second, though. I don't know. I had no way of knowing these things after all. Started making videos that was posting on social media and carried on meeting people and speaking whenever I could in event. So I started to become, in the word of my father, the one that had IDs above his station. I started to lead, I started to speak, and I started to communicate a lot more than I was used to, thanks to a lot of the skills that we can learn here in Toastmasters. I started to become the cool guy that people wanted to meet at parties and network. And one day, somebody even asked if they could take a selfie with me last year, which was quite interesting and I quite liked it. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? After all. But what next after that? Well, that is an interesting question. And I had a conversation with a Toastmaster friend of mine, Colleen, that lives in Paris a few months ago. She WhatsApped me and say, hey, how is it going, Florian? You've been very silent recently. I'm like, Colleen, I'm no longer district director. I'm no longer in charge now. I don't have as many things to do, as many things to say. I got to be silent. And so, what? Colleen, I no longer have the responsibilities I used to. I don't really have as many things to say. So the things you've done before, they didn't happen, and so on. And this is where the penny dropped for me. This is where I realized that even though I had learned and practiced some of the skills at Toastmasters, I actually hadn't been very good at following them up and really doing them for myself. One of the projects I had to do actually in as part of the strategic relationship path is to write a PR plan for myself. And one of the steps in that PR plan included I want to write a book about my experiences, about public speaking, and so on. And I want this to be done before the end of June 2020. I don't think any of you have heard about a book coming from me, so I didn't achieve that at all. So, what's next then? You might be wondering. Well, what I came to realize while reflecting on this project, on many other things, is that quite often our worst enemy, the thing that prevents us from doing the things we want, it's not necessarily not knowing how to do them and so on. It is us. We are quite often our own worst enemies. And self leadership and the importance of all of that is only something I started to touch upon and realize actually quite late in my Toastmasters leadership journey. But it is very much my next challenge for right now to become better at leading myself and to kind of do the thing that I did successfully in Toastmasters in the great big scary world outside of it. And I've got no other choice but to do it once and for all and to succeed. Because after all, I think I've got a few things to say. 100 speeches on now. Madam Toastmaster.